Wasim, do I start?
Yes, sir. Please start.
Okay, we start now. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists, Dr. T.C.A. Raghavan and Shri Shenikrau, head of the program division of the India International Center, T.C.A. Warm welcome to all of you. One might say good afternoon or good evening to those who are in Delhi and in India, and maybe good morning to those who are in New York, since we are the India International Center and we have an international audience. Now, our topic is COVID-19 and geopolitics. First thing to note about our topic is that COVID-19 came to the world in 2020, a world which was led by political leaders who, with a few honorable exceptions, lacked a 2020 vision. Let me illustrate this point. The mayor of Wuhan, where it started, a young doctor had gone to the social media and alerted, but he was rebuked and silenced by the mayor. Why? Because the mayor had plans for a big do on the 18th of January with a banquet for 40,000 families. Mark my words, 40,000 families. So he went ahead with it, and the virus went viral. President Xi Jinping woke up. He brought Wuhan and Hubei province under lockdown. So the mayor of Wuhan acted irresponsibly. Point number two, China itself acted irresponsibly when on 31st December 2019, it told the WHO that there were cases of pneumonia of unknown origin, but there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission. Now that was equivocation. The WHO should have asked searching questions instead of accepting at its face value what China said. In fact, the WHO has behaved in a manner which is totally irresponsible and moved at a pace so slow that it outsnailed the snail. By the time March 11th, 12th, the WHO declared a pandemic. Already 4,613 deaths had occurred, and there were 125,260 infections in 118 countries. Let me ask WHO a simple question. Is there anything in its rules which says that it should wait for more than 4,000 deaths before it declares a pandemic? So that is the first thing to note about this COVID-19. Now, we speak of the impact of COVID-19. I believe there's a slight confusion of thought there, because after all, what is COVID-19? It's a semi-animate virus that dies off if it cannot meet with any organic cell. Now, COVID-19 has no agenda. It has no intentions. Only beings with consciousness and reasoning powers can have an agenda. So what matters is, I want to emphasize this point, what matters is the ability or lack thereof of us human beings, Homo sapiens, as we call them, as we call ourselves, to deal with COVID-19. The pandemic that was an epidemic in Wuhan, as we have seen, could have been prevented if the mayor had acted more responsibly. Now, the second point is there is no foreseeable end to this pandemic as of now. It has crossed 20 million cases globally. The third is that a concerted, coherent international action is still not there. Words, 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 not enough action. Can we call 2020 annus horribilis? This term was first used by an Anglican to describe the year 1870, when the papacy proclaimed the doctrine of papal infallibility. More recently, the term was used by Her Majesty Elizabeth II in 1992. Now, leaving behind the thought of annus horribilis, we enter a pleasanter territory, and I'm going to say a word or two about our distinguished panelists. I will start with Dr. T.C.A. Raghavan, who will be speaking first. He is a historian, author of books of enduring value. Attendant Lords Bayram Khan and Abdur Rahim. Now, this book was awarded the Muhammad Habib Memorial Prize by the Indian History Congress the same year that the book was published. This is indeed a rare honor. Next is People Next Door on Indo-Pak relations. I honestly believe this must be a compulsory reading for everyone in the government, in India and in Pakistan and rest of the South Asia continent, and also in China. Now, the third one is historymen Jadunath Sarkar, G.S. Sardesai, Raghubir Sinh, and their quest for India's past. Well, our historian is writing about other historians. Shall we call him a meta-historian? T.C.A. had a brilliant career in the Indian Foreign Service. He was our High Commissioner in Pakistan. Currently, he is Director General of ICWA. We are fortunate indeed to have T.C.A. as panelist. Now, each panelist has signaled that they will be speaking for 15 minutes or less. Let us now invite Dr. T.C.A. Raghavan to speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Fabian. Thank you also to the India International Center and to the program division head, Tete, for inviting me. Nice to be on this panel with Mr. Rao, and delighted to be here this afternoon, of course. Although it's virtual, nevertheless, India International Center is such a wonderful institution that it is always a great pleasure to be associated with it in any manner. So let me begin with what I think are the two subjects really we are discussing today. One is the pandemic, of course, COVID-19, the coronavirus epidemic, and the second is the geopolitics around it. And to my mind, these are two separate issues, but they are, of course, directly related to each other because we are seeing both happening together at the same time. So this in itself gives them an intimate relationship. Now, I don't want to go into the details of the pandemic. All of us are going through that, going through all its repercussions, and we all await with some amount of dread to see what its final outcome will be. And certainly the news, such as there is with regard to the impact on the economy, with regard to the toll itself, and with regard to the longer term impact it will have on our social structures, on our means of ways we interact with each other. All that is in the future, but there is certainly a great deal of apprehension, if not dread, amongst all of us as we address the issues that it has raised. It is, of course, in the nature of a black swan event, but every event has its, and nothing is totally arbitrary. So, in that sense, a pandemic makes you think about three fundamental issues. Firstly, that did we address in our different agendas internationally, did we address aspects pertaining to desecuritization, which would mean public health, education, access to public services, and so on sufficiently? I think the pandemic makes you think about the desecuritization agenda in a much more focused way. The second is, of course, it makes you think about climate change and the ecology, because, as I said, while the pandemic appears to be a black swan event, that it has descended on us arbitrarily out of nowhere, in fact, it has causes, and these causes lie in the way we interface with our environment. And the third factor, of course, which the pandemic makes you think about, is the future of the global economy. And I think every pandemic, and it's useful to remind ourselves that this is not the first time that an epidemic has impacted on us, and neither will it be the last. It has a certain biological logic which will play itself out. But yes, it is true that because of the fact that this pandemic occurred in 2020, it has implications which are quite different from an earlier epidemic a century ago, which was of the Spanish flu, because the world is so much more globalized, so much more interconnected, that the impact of this is going to be global. So in some senses, the COVID-19 epidemic has, regardless of what the narratives are currently about deglobalization, it has demonstrated as to how there can be a truly global moment, in that every country, every geography is facing a similar set of health issues as we are currently. The second issue is about the geopolitics, and there are geopolitical changes. There is a geopolitical churn. We are in the midst of a geopolitical churn today, which is not directly related to the pandemic per se. The pandemic, by slowing everything else down, has made us focus on the geopolitical churn underway, but that geopolitical churn would have occurred on its own, and in fact was occurring on its own. And the principal component of churn is, of course, China. Because what we are witnessing today is the fact that a new power, and it's not a question of objective determination of whether a new global power, a new global hegemon is emerged or is still emerging. The fact is, Chinese behavior in many ways is the behavior of a power which is positioning itself as a rival hegemon to the United States. So this is a geopolitical churn. When you have the rise of a great power, every other relationship undergoes a certain reordering. Relations between states undergo a reordering, and we are in that sense in a world which is going to see pretty significant political change because of this geopolitical churn. Now, what are the implications of this? What are the takeaways from this? Some of them are very significant. I think it ends one phase of history, which began in the 1970s, but was animated most by 1979, and that was the crystallization of a belief, particularly in the United States, that the peaceful rise of China, that the growth of the Chinese economy would see a consolidation of China around the quote-unquote liberal alliance, that it was possible to enable China to grow into a liberal power which would consolidate the existing Western alliance. I think that phase of history, that belief system has changed, and that itself has many implications in terms of new alliances, new concerts, and as I said, a reordering of global power. But for India, what are the implications of this change? And this was my third point, really. I think for India, the changes, we are in the midst of a period of profound change. Why is that? Because firstly, like every other country, we have to adjust to the fact that there is a new power which has emerged, and it is going to impact on us as it is going to impact on everyone else. But for India, there is a greater immediacy to this issue, because what has arisen is a new power which is adjacent to us, and so it's no longer an abstract issue of addressing new power relationships. It is a very concrete and real issue of having to deal with a great power which is now adjacent to you, with which you have a history of adversarial relations, and which is therefore going to pose for you very great challenges, but also present a number of opportunities. Now, the impact, the takeaway for this, for India at least, are numerous. Beginning with our own neighborhood. In South Asia, our traditional view was that if we keep great powers out of South Asia, it is in our interest and it is in the interest of our neighbors. Whether we could apply that policy consistently is a different matter, but certainly that is the template we always aspired to. It is now very evident that that template has to be discarded, because the question is not of keeping great powers out, but the question is of addressing the issues which emerge because there is a great power within us. Similarly, there are issues in the Indian Ocean area. In brief, China poses for us both continental and maritime issues, which possibly have to be addressed both in the near term and also in the medium and long term. Can we decipher all the changes, all the geopolitical changes which are going to arise because of this change? No, we can't. We are at the beginning of that process of change, and it will take a long time for us to understand the implications the full implications of this change. In many ways, the period we are currently entering is similar to what happened to India in the 1990s, when you did not have so much the rise of a great power as you had the decline of an existing great power, and you suddenly had to suddenly adjust to a world which was unipolar, and in which the United States was a hyper power. And much of Indian foreign policy in the next 20 years can really be understood in terms of our adjusting to that change in the global power structure. I think over the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, we are going to be in a similar process of adjustment. So it would be presumptuous to think that all the implications of this change are already before us and that they can be addressed straight away. What is the relationship between the pandemic and this geopolitical churn? As I said, I think the pandemic, by slowing everything else down, makes us focus on the geopolitical churn much more sharply. But there are two different processes at play here, and I think it will help us understand our current reality if we understand the conceptual distinction between these two different processes. I think my allotted time is up, or do I have some more time, Ambassador Fabian?
Well, I thought you have taken only 10 minutes.
Okay, so I have
So,
some more. So
yes.
let me dwell on this point, because I find I find that we can enhance our understanding of the present movement if we look back into the past. I think it is useful to see the current situation when we are dealing with the rise of a new global power, to see what had happened in the early 90s when we were dealing with the decline of a global power. And there are many similarities to the situation that we confront today. Uh, you did not have an epidemic then, but you had a major foreign policy, you had a major economic crisis. That crisis was the outcome of the decline of a great power, but was also powered by other factors internal to us. The big difference, of course, between then and now is that that was an economic crisis which largely India faced on its own. The present situation is a global crisis which different countries are facing, although to different extents. So you have the elements of an economic crisis. You have at that time the Soviet Union declining. What you thought was a cherished, very important pillar of your foreign policy approach had suddenly disintegrated. In a similar way, you have now the rise of a new power, and as I said, older templates have to be rethought and possibly discarded when we approach our foreign policy, whether in the immediate South Asia neighborhood or on a larger arena. But there are other parallels too, which are quite interesting. The early 90s, the period from 1991 till about the late 90s was a period of enormous difficulties in India-Pakistan relations, very similar to what is happening now. It was a period in which your entire South Asian neighborhood was undergoing a great deal of stress. The Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan had been completed in late 1988, early 1989, and thereafter Afghanistan itself, especially in the early 90s and mid 90s, went through a period of tremendous strife and civil war and civil conflict. In the other end of the subcontinent, in Sri Lanka, you had the post IPKF withdrawal situation. Again, a very, very testing time for India in numerous ways. So there are numerous parallels which exist. And I think reflecting on that past may be useful when we are looking at our current dilemmas and challenges with regard to China, with regard to Pakistan, the situation with Nepal that has emerged, and most of all, the issues that exist in dealing with our neighborhood in the context of a new great power that has emerged and is very much embedded in that neighborhood. You recently had the situation of a meeting between the foreign ministers of the meeting between meeting by China, which included Pakistan, Nepal, and Afghanistan. It certainly marks a change in the way politics in South Asia was expected by us to evolve. And how we adjust to that change is really the key question. As I said, not all the implications of what is happening are clear, neither can they be deciphered. It is a long-term process of adjustment that we will have to enter into. One final point with regard to what Ambassador Fabian had begun with, which is in terms of evaluating global responses to the pandemic. Now, it is true that one can have views on the Chinese response, one can have assessments of the WHO, but the fact is that a pandemic, and especially a pandemic of this intensity, it will inevitably leave you with the conclusion that no country or no power can handle this effectively. And if we look around the world today and we see citizens' assessments of their particular government's handling of that situation, barring maybe one or two cases, certainly cases which you can count on one hand, barring a few cases, every government has been found wanting, and this is in the nature of black swan events, and it is in the nature of epidemics that they have inbuilt in them elements which make humans realize the value of introspection and hubris. I'll stop here, Ambassador, and would very much like to thank you again for inviting me to join this panel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Raghavan. You have, covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure there will be questions later, but I just want to make one or two observations. You correctly said, that the West believed that the peaceful rise of China will be a good thing and that it will, happen like that. But at the same time, the primary motivation of Nixon and of Kissinger was to bring in China as a countervailing force to the Soviet Union. We do not know whether Nixon had any thought of the peaceful rise of China. And later, of course, scholars argued that, China, with its opening up to the world economically, will eventually join the world rule-based order and, things might change. But so far it hasn't happened. And as you correctly pointed out, we are still waiting for that. Another thing is you said that, the pandemic has slowed down things and that geopolitical changes have been taking place in any way. Quite right. But let's consider the following scenario. President Trump gets voted out primarily because of his mishandling of the pandemic. And then there will be a new president, Biden, and there will be a lot of change in American policy. So the pandemic has a certain, causative factor. Now, as regards the international community, the international community, as you also said, could have done much more. And we all know that when it happened to Italy, and Italy asked for help from the European Union, they just looked the other way. So that's where we are for the time being. Now it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Shenikrau.
Thank you very much.
Editor.
I'm Mr. Shenikrau.
Pardon?
I'm Mr. Shenikrau, if I may. Am I audible?
Yes, you said Mr.
Yes.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
Mr. Shenikrau, Chief Editor of the Madras Courier, an electronic magazine widely read in India and in the rest of the world. He revived it in 2016, 233 years after its extinction. I do not know of any other resurrection of this type. He's joining us from Oxford. He speaks truth to power, fearless of consequences. I read the Madras Courier regularly. The current issue is about how to handle stress from COVID-19. Thank you, Chief Editor, for that.
Thank you.
Well, he is also a film director and producer. He is CEO of 7 Media Broadcasting, and he has produced films, including 7 Notes to Infinity, broadcast by the History Channel to 54 countries. translated into different languages. He's also an adventurer. He cycled from the southern tip of India to Kashmir. He cycled up to Khardungla, more than 18,000 feet above the sea level. Truly a Renaissance man. We are privileged indeed to have Mr. Shenikrau with us. Now, let us request Mr. Shenikrau to address us, after which we will have the Q&A.
Thank you, Ambassador Fabian. I'm delighted to be joining this conversation. Thank you, Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan, for your wonderful insights into COVID-19 and geopolitics. Thank you, Tete, for organizing this India International Center, and everyone else, and all of you listening to us. I'm greatly delighted to share my thoughts with you. I would like to argue, for a start, that COVID-19 has not slowed down, but has accelerated the pace of the restructuring of the world order. Just like how in 1918, the Spanish flu, which killed over 500 million people, has restructured the entire world order, I think COVID-19 is also going to restructure the world order. I'm going to basically put it out into 4 points that I'd like to emphasize on. One, I'd like to call this the decade of a great upheaval, by which I mean that there is going to be a significant restructuring of geopolitics. Then I also think that there is going to be a significant restructuring of the government. There is also going to be a significant restructuring of the way in which trade and commerce is conducted across the world. And last but not the least, there's going to be a significant restructuring of the multilateral institutions. Now, what do we mean by restructuring of the world order? Let's take, for example, the restructuring of the world order or restructuring of geopolitics. Ever since COVID-19 started, there's been a significant restructuring in the way in power blocks, primarily enabled by an information war. This, of course, does not necessarily limit itself to COVID-19, but COVID-19 has actually accelerated the speed at which the world has reorganized, or world is reorganizing itself into various power blocks. Take, for example, one story. Ambassador Michael Bolton in his book writes how Donald Trump was asking about, was begging or pleading with President Xi Jinping about buying soybeans so that he can get re-elected in the American elections. This was much before this was much before COVID-19. But just as COVID-19 started, the entire demeanor or the angle has changed. Let's put it this way: China has found a worthy adversary. When we look at the restructuring of global politics or geopolitics, we look at how after COVID-19, China has had to do a lot of reputation damage. Damage control for its reputation. It also brings to the forefront the importance of public health and the lack of infrastructure to deal with pandemics. China, for example, wants to control the narrative. Control the narrative in a way that significantly that tells the world that it is in charge of how COVID-19 needs to be addressed. There is also a push in all this information war. Through this information war, there is a significant push towards a much more hyper nationalistic world. There is we are living in a world where information and disinformation is spread in such a way that every human activity is more or less viewed with a degree of suspicion, and it is turned into some sort of a weapon, whether it is new technology, whether it is new new policies, new new what I wanted to say was that there is a significant attempt both by Russia, China, the United States to control the narrative on who and how who is controlling COVID-19. There are two dates which are very significant. One is January 21st, when Taiwan sent an email to the World Health Organization saying that the leadership that China has, that it has had its first coronavirus case. But unfortunately, Taiwan is the only country with a confirmed imported case. It was left out of the World Health Organization's emergency meeting because China was blocking Taiwan's attendance. But China tries to control that. The World Health Organization, as Ambassador Fabian had said, has been very lax in dealing with dealing with the entire pandemic. The other important question that I'd like to, the other important trend that I'd like to look at is how big data and artificial intelligence is going to be the deciding factor for government policies across the world, and that also accelerates the way in which the world is going to restructure itself. So, are we going to see policies being taken on the basis of artificial intelligence and data being provided by private companies? Is that going to have a significant effect on the way we live our lives? Is that going to have a significant impact on the way we perceive and experience the world right now? I think it will have a significant impact. The other thing that we have been seeing for the past couple of decades, but which has accelerated in the recent past, is in the restructuring of multilateral organizations. Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan has mentioned, Ambassador Fabian has mentioned, that China has joined the World Trade Organization, and it has slowly and steadily been, conquering, or more or less making its footprint very visible on multilateral institutions. The World Trade Organization, for example, China, which joined the World Trade Organization, for example, has gamed the world, has gamed the currency. It has essentially used the World Trade Organization to become a leading player in the world, but it has not really opened itself to the rest of the world order. Did China really emerge as a democratic player? Did the United States think that were the United States presumptions about were they fundamentally flawed? I think they were fundamentally flawed. But my key point here is that there is going to be a fundamental restructuring of the world order, that there are going to be power blocks, that it is going to be essentially enabled and triggered by an information warfare, where non-state actors, nations, and radicals who are desperate to control the narrative will take hold and grab hold of the geopolitical situation. It also brings to the forefront the importance of public health and epidemiology and virology, and the importance of big government led by artificial intelligence and data. It also accelerates how the world is restructuring in terms of trade and commerce. We can already see that the United Kingdom, Bulgaria, the United States wants to rethink about its global supply chains away from China. That also provides us great opportunities. That also provides India with great opportunities. We should be ready for a considerable restructuring of global trade and commerce. And what this means is that we need to ask ourselves and reframe our questions in such a way that they help us figure out what can really be an important way forward to making the most of these challenges and turning them into opportunities. Ambassador Fabian, Ambassador Fabian?
Yes.
With this, I think having said this, there are also significant changes. There are significant challenges in that China poses to India. For example, China has, as the world was dealing with the coronavirus case, China went around saying that we have to cooperate with them on the one hand, while sort of making inroads into Ladakh and also in the seas. China has very strategically managed to use Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and now even Iran, if reports are to be believed, to sort of use their ports in such a way that it gives them a significant advantage in maritime terms. So my point is that there is going to be a significant acceleration, not slowing down, of the restructuring of the world order. Ambassador Fabian, do I have more time or?
Another 100 seconds.
Right. So what are the important questions that we need to ask ourselves in terms of the opportunities that we have? Can COVID-19 with its challenges become an opportunity for us in India to reposition ourselves as a global supply chain hub? Will we be able to push forward will we be able to manage to push forward a significant alternative that is democratic, that does not represent an authoritarian China-like worldview? Will we be able to take the opportunity into our hands and encourage more trade and commerce, while at the same time, being able to not be a part of a power block? These are questions I think that we need to ask ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Rao, for a very sort of what shall I say? You spoke with such clarity And you said that the COVID-19 is accelerating the restructuring of the world order. I
Yeah.
personally agree with you, but we will see what the audience thinks about it. Now, you also said about the lack of infrastructure for public health and all that. Correct
Mhm.
point. But at the same time, even given the infrastructure that is there, governments could have acted sooner. I'll give you only one example. Italy could have acted sooner. Boys and girls came after spending Christmas vacation in China. And some people said, let us sort of close down the schools. The government refused. In fact, they got a big delegation from China to celebrate the beginning of the Italo-Chinese cultural year. And there was much drinking and there was no social distancing then. Nobody had thought about it. So we all, Homo sapiens sapiens, have been negligent. Now, let's move on to the best part of it, and that is the Q&A. I have to sort of switch to another link, which I'm doing. Now, I want to explain that, you will find, you'll have to type your questions, and then, I will read out or summarize the question. And if possible, do say to which panelist you are addressing the question. Now, I want to make one more remark. I wish it were possible to have the technology where the participant could have been asking the question himself or herself, and the face could have been seen. Let's hope that will be there soon, but not this time. So let's have the questions, please. Okay. I've got quite a few questions. Give me a few seconds to read them, please. Well, let me read out one from Mr. Harish Kare, Ambassador Raghavan. Do you think we would have had our border problem with China even if there was no COVID crisis? I will read out a few questions and then the answers will follow. Then there is a question from Aruna Rodriguez from AR from the previous. Okay, 1 second. Professor Giuseppe Trito says, providing the matrix source virus could have meant admitting that SARS-CoV-2 China virus was created in the laboratory. Therefore, China continues to lie and people continue to die. The economies of the world will find it difficult to pick up. This gives China, which must be termed a maverick nation, and an unquestionable global advantage. Well, that is an observation which, the panelists may or may not like to comment on. Let me now request Ambassador Raghavan to answer that question, and meanwhile, I'll try to read by myself the rest. Ambassador Raghavan.
Thank you, Mr. Khare. Very interesting question. Would we have had a broader crisis without an epidemic? Well, this is not the first. Situation which we have faced with China on the land boundaries. As you're aware, that these have been occurring from time to time. What made this one different was the fact that a face-off between troops on both sides was accompanied by loss of human life. the fact that people lost lives, that soldiers lost lives, made this qualitatively different. But the fact that soldiers lost lives could have been a tactical factor, that it happened. It was not anticipated, it was not expected, but that it happened. So I don't think the border standoff with China is an outcome of the COVID crisis. The fact is, in the past decade, there have been a number of such situations that at a general level, the fact is that the general point is that we were in a situation where we needed to come to a new modus vivendi with China on the border and on the handling of such situations in the border. The regime which had been set up in the late 1980s and early 1990s was not working. And the earlier major crisis in Doklam, again, there was a similar standoff as there is now, with, of course, the major difference that there was no loss of life then. That also demonstrated that the infrastructure of both armies, the capacities of both armies had grown exponentially in the last 30 odd years, and therefore some new arrangement was required between India and China with regard to the border. So I don't see the present situation as directly related to the COVID crisis. But yes, the fact that this epidemic has coincided with numerous other forms of Chinese assertion, whether in the South China Sea, whether in with regard to Hong Kong, Taiwan, etc., in our own neighborhood, the fact that China suffered a certain amount of reputational damage on account of the way the epidemic spread. All these are factors which may have contributed to the current India-China situation. But at the core of it, the fact is that such situations have been occurring on the boundary, and what they were indicating was that you needed some new, more stable arrangement to deal with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Raghavan. Now, I'm going to read out one or two observations, and there is one more question. Let me just see. Okay. One observation by Shri Jitesh Khosla. The pandemic has been marked by the decline of the US role in the world order in the scenario of approaching conflict between US and China and the collapse of the old globalized order. What is the future of liberal democracy in the world? Then that, of course, is a question and an observation. Then from Mr. B.M. Khanna, Shri B.M. Khanna, I think Vipassana meditation can play a big role in diffusing the impact of COVID-19, shall certainly be of help in regaining health after bout of this infection. There is also one question about, about the reliability of the Russian vaccine. So what I'm going to do now is to request both the panelists to give their concluding remarks, and after which I may make one or two remarks, and then I think we can keep to the time which IAC had sort of asked us, that is 5 o'clock. But in case there are other questions, please do type it out. We can handle. So first now, Mr. Rao.
I think there is going to be a significant impact coronavirus has had and is going to have a big impact on geopolitics. The world is not going to be as we know it, and all the things that we have taken for granted are not going to be the same. This, despite the fact that we have vaccines, and even though we have vaccines, even though we have trade flowing in, they may be significant. It is going to significantly change the world. It is all well and good to discuss these, but we have to prepare ourselves practically, pragmatically, to deal with these, to deal with the coronavirus and the significant changes in the geopolitics. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, Ambassador Fabian. Ambassador Raghavan, it's been great being a part of this.
Thank you, Mr. Rao. Ambassador Raghavan, please.
Well, it's a useful point of time to think about the future of liberal democracy. But to have an informed discussion in it, I think we need to understand the terms much more with greater clarity. Because what we call liberal democracy is also really an alliance amongst like-minded countries in Europe and in North America. And so when a new power rises, it is often the case that the issues that throws up are presented in terms of values or ideologies. But it is also possible to see the issues thrown up in terms of geopolitics. And in a sense, if one goes back 50, 60 years, post-Second World War, when again the issue was posed in terms of the conflict between different sets of values, but it could also be understood in terms of geopolitics, because there were two.
Yes.
Is there a
Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead, please. I request a technician to come in and hello. Hello. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. I think Professor Raghavan has disconnected, so he'll be back soon. So let me connect him.
You are reconnecting?
Yes.
Okay.
I think there was some technical glitch.
That's right.
So where did we get interrupted?
Well, I thought you were speaking, no?
About
liberal democracy.
So could you hear anything at all, or?
No, we heard you. You started by saying that you have to define it, and then you went on.
Yes, I think it's easy to say that the question is one of liberal democracy versus the great other, and this is certainly the way during the Cold War, at the beginning of the Cold War, issues were often framed in terms of an ideological or value driven issue. But the fact is that this is two power centers, two major powers competing as rival hegemons, and each will present their particular position in terms of a certain ideological and value driven on a value driven basis. For those who are not part of either hegemon, I think we have to see issues with greater clarity. It is not necessarily the issue of a divide between liberals and those who are less liberals or not liberals, but between two competing power systems. And if one sees it in geopolitical terms, we have to see where the balance of our advantage will be, both in the short term and in the medium and long term. I think specifically, if we discuss this issue with regard to China, we have to be ever mindful of the fact that we are dealing with China not as an abstract power, but as a power or as a great power which is adjacent to us. So there is a qualitative difference between India dealing with China and Australia dealing with China, or France dealing with China. I think these real issues that we confront are also important.
Okay. Dr. Raghavan, did you finish?
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Raghavan. Now, I'm going to conclude because of the time factor. There is one question from Ambassador Rajnikant Verma. Is there any reason to think that China deliberately released this virus? I'm not the one most competent to answer, but I'm going to answer. There is a growing opinion among scientists that this is not a natural virus. It has been something engineered. So it is quite possible that it escaped from the lab or it was released from the lab. But we have to suspend judgment on that. Now there is also a question from Shri B.S. Chakravarti. I have a question whether the current situation will lead to an economic war between USA and China. Well, it's like this. Frankly, there is already a Cold War on between United States and China. And only thing is that this Cold War is going to be so different from the previous one, because in the previous one, there was a lot of ideological appeal. Socialism appealed, especially to the newly decolonized countries. And democracy appealed, especially to Western Europe. But this time, authoritarian communism does not apply much, does not appeal much to the rest of the world. And the American version of democracy also is lacking in appeal. Only thing is that because of the symbiotic relationship between the two economies, America cannot hurt China without hurting itself, and the other way around. So we'll have to watch and see. As far as India is concerned, my personal view is that in that Cold War, India should not take any sides. India should be neutral, but India should have a strong relationship with the United States, because that will be an insurance against any military act by China, as we have witnessed already. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have had an excellent discussion, but as you see, China is the elephant in the room. We spend so much time on China, and maybe we need another discussion. But let me thank you for sparing the time and making it very interactive. And let us give a big hand to our distinguished panelists, Mr. Shenikrau and Dr. T.C.A. Raghavan. I can only do this. And, in a physical sitting, it would have been much easier. So we come to the conclusion, and thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.